Anna Marie, thank you for your bold and courageous podcast tackling many of the difficult issues in our country at present. Many of those issues have been ongoing since the inception of our country. And in episode 2, there was a difficult conversation that was certainly uncomfortable that you had with your friend Ira. I think I can bring a unique perspective to this dialogue, as I've been a lifelong rural Wisconsinite and also am a practicing family physician in our rural Wisconsin community. The truth is, most rural Wisconsinites have had very little interactions with black individuals in their entire lifetime. When Ira had mentioned that many of his white liberal friends only have 1 or 2 black friends, I'm not surprised, and I am no exception to that rule. However, I can remember the first time I ever saw a black person, and I was well into my teens, and that interaction was very limited. Although much of Wisconsin supported Trump and voted for him, I don't think Wisconsin rural citizens are generally racist. Racism is something that happens in a faraway place for them, and most rural Wisconsinites are good people and generally believe that they're not racist. They pride themselves with a strong work ethic, and through a strong work ethic, they're able to achieve and provide for their families. That being said, there is certainly a living hypocrisy that racism is in fact something that has happened since the beginning of our country's inception, and yet racism does not affect any of the people who live this lifestyle in any meaningful way day to day. Many race interactions are reinforced with sound bites on the local news, or when interacting with the Green Bay Packers. And that's a sad fact. Episode 2 really got me thinking, how can I simultaneously hold the beliefs that I am not a racist and still hold the belief and experiential knowledge that I've had very few interactions with black people? It certainly makes the interactions I've had with black people throughout my training as a physician even more memorable and more prone to forming stereotypes. So if racism and my hard work ethic as a tool to access my belief for prosperity are held simultaneously, then at some point, if I'm going to rectify those two belief systems, I have to acknowledge the fact that I've benefited tremendously from white privilege. I think this is where the white liberals need to take their conversations. It needs to be introspective. Somehow, racism still exists in our world despite a glaring and horrific history of racism in our past. I believe none of us are immune to racism. And there probably is some biological reason why grouping with similar people who look the same as you, either in a tribe or a family, has some kind of biological place. But we're in a post-biological world in an evolutionary sense. For many rural folk, I think the fact that they work hard to provide for their families somehow in their minds gets cheapened by the fact that racism, in fact, 1, is in fact truth, and 2, does that somehow mean that all the trials and tribulations white, poor, rural folk have had is cheapened by the fact that black people as a whole have struggled far greater than any rural individual? This truly comes down to how big your worldview is. And for folks that are struggling for health care, struggling to make ends meet, and are paycheck to paycheck, it's all the same. Your struggles don't extend past day-to-day issues of securing housing, food, and safety. I do not think it's any surprise that this is true for rural folk when Milwaukee, Wisconsin is one of the most segregated cities in America. And the truth is, segregation has been very effective for oppressing different groups of people. I would be bold enough to say I think segregation is the root of passive racism, which makes the travel bans in America and all of the other xenophobic types of thought patterns even more dangerous that racism will promulgate and will increase. Pitting oppressed groups against each other is a situation that is ripe for white supremacy. And I strongly believe the only way to remedy that is a strong public education system. Until everybody has equal access to education, racism will always exist in our country. And we need to be mindful about segregated populations and make sure that we are integrated as a society so that we can learn from each other and interact with each other. My personal American narrative is really no different than this type of mentality. Neither of my folks went to college. I grew up in a very small rural community with no stop-and-go lights, no fast food, and the biggest employer in town was K through 12 public schools in one building. Without being able to access quality public education, there is no way I would have been able to overcome my parents' economic situation to have a successful career as a family physician and economic security. When it comes to ameliorating racism in our country, I think there's a two-step approach. One, strong public education, and two, the reintegration of our segregated society.